Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Torres Dwyer. Hello, Efrain Rosario. How are you doing?
Good, Daniel. Nice to be with you as always.
Likewise. And thanks everyone for joining us. By the time you're listening to this, we will have reached 10,000 followers on LinkedIn. Very exciting time for us. So thanks everyone for your support and following. And by the way, if you haven't yet, make sure you also subscribe to our podcast on your favorite player, be it Apple Podcast, Spotify, or whatever you're using. So Efrain, what do we have today?
Well, Daniel, as you know, this time of year is a time of reflection for a lot of people. And that often means looking back on the prior 12 months and thinking about what their accomplishments have been, but also looking forward in terms of what's next. And oftentimes that could mean a change of role or even a change of company. And I was curious, from your professional opinion, how do you see that in terms of like when you approach candidates or you're talking with candidates who have made those kinds of decisions in their careers?
For sure. So at the end of the day, changes or decisions in general need to make sense, be it to stay in a role, to stay in a company, or to move, right? So as long as you're always learning and you have the right reasons to change, it is the right thing to do. What you don't want to do in a career, and that's what a lot of people make a mistake and they reach that feared career plateau, is to have paralysis and comfort, too much comfort, let's say, and not take decisions to move.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think our guest today is actually a great example of somebody who has been able to make those changes throughout his career.
Yeah, so he's like an example of someone that's really built an expertise in a function, in this case, digital and e-commerce, and has really become a change agent. And he's really been able to specialize on that function and use these transferable skills to make an impact, right, in different industries and different categories, but always with that digital and e-com background.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think hopefully our guests are going to really enjoy hearing from him and hearing about the wealth of experiences he has at some pretty prominent companies along the way.
Absolutely. And right now, he's the Senior Director for Digital Retail EMEA at Canada Goose, and his name is Ganesh Santhiram, and you'll hear about how he's really made an impact in Swiss knives, in watches, in outdoors, and starting his career in football.
Brilliant. So cool. Yeah. Thank you guys for having me on. And I'm Sri Ganesh. I'm based in Zurich. I'm currently the Senior Director Digital Retail for the EMEA region for Canada Goose. So, as you know, Canada Goose is basically a luxury performance apparel company, make some of the best parkas in the world, keeps you warm, especially this time of the year. And I've been with the company now for just over a year and a half, leading the EMEA team. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining again, Ganesh. And tell us a bit about where you come from, because obviously you've been in Switzerland for a long time, but you're not from there originally. You're actually from somewhere that's around 12-hour flight from Switzerland, and how you ended up in Switzerland in the first place.
Yeah, I'm originally from Malaysia, so a lot more sunnier than it is now here. And I actually grew up on a small island north of Malaysia called Penang. And I moved here to Switzerland in 2006. Prior to that, I was actually already in Europe and Germany. So a bit of, before that, I was born, raised in Malaysia, but I went to the UK very young because my father traveled quite a bit, and he was doing his PhD in the UK. So I went to school and grew up there and kind of got my formative years in the UK. And I moved to Germany because I'd met my then wife, and we decided to move away from Malaysia. I moved to Germany, didn't know a single word of German, just turned up with a suitcase and decided that I'm going to try and figure it out. And I managed to get a role in Germany, and through that role, I was working for a market research agency that was doing a lot of work for UEFA, who are based in Switzerland, and through a transition, and they basically hired me to come into from agency side onto the client side, and that's how I kind of ended up in Switzerland. Yeah.
And what do you like about living in Switzerland? Because you've been there for a long time.
Switzerland has so many things to offer. It's besides, nature, the actual beauty of the country is just stunning. And the thing that keeps me here, I think, is really that a balance between having you're close to nature, you're out. It's a very outdoorsy country. So people, my love of road biking started when I moved here to Switzerland. You're forced to go out, whether it's in the winter with skiing or in the summer hiking and road biking. It just facilitates you to live this really active lifestyle. The other thing that I think I didn't appreciate as much in my early years, which I do now, is the fact that with Switzerland being so central, it facilitates also the ease of kind of going off to Italy or to France or to Germany on weekends and stuff. And I think I really appreciate that balance between, leaving the country, going off somewhere else, and not just for the good food in Italy, for example, or the better weather, but also, good wine in France and all these other perks of living in this kind of central area.
Are you a savvy consumer insight professional with an interest in AI applications and market research? Discover BullChat AI, the pioneering AI-powered qualitative consumer research platform that's reshaping the consumer insight landscape. Picture this scenario: effortlessly connecting with your target audience, posing bespoke questions, and receiving insightful responses to address your business queries, all neatly compiled into an actionable report within a mere 24 hours. BullChat AI streamlines the research process, enabling you to make agile, well-informed decisions at a fraction of the conventional cost. Curious to experience the efficiency firsthand? Visit www.bullchatai.com and embark on your free trial today.
I think one of the things that I like about the fact that you have this kind of different opportunities is also the flexibility that it forces you to be flexible, right, and be more tolerant. And I think that's something that being an immigrant myself, my parents, or the heritage were my grandparents came from India to Malaysia. You have that kind of ingrained immigrant mentality where you're forced to be almost like a chameleon. You can go into, I have that feeling where you can throw me in any situation. I need maybe a couple of hours, and then I can kind of adapt and start to assimilate and kind of be more local. And whether that goes into having a Swiss German accent or other things to kind of assimilate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like you said,
so you managed to speak.
It's a central hub. It's almost
German
like perfectly located German? To be able to,
I
do, experience those other cultures
fluently,
and but still maintain that home base.
I understand Swiss German 100%.
It's a great trade-off.
And speaking it because it does sound funny when I speak it.
Is that you've also, as a result of that, become almost like a third culture
kind of the local area,
citizen or world citizen.
With my friends at the tennis
given
club,
all your experiences,
people in the region, then I do speak in Swiss German. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting one because, as you rightly pointed out, I have kind of navigated through multiple industries, from kind of sports to luxury consumer goods to, kind of tech startup in the kind of, medtech, femtech space. And I think one of the things that motivates me is that level of flexibility to go in and try and adapt and do new things. And I guess you guys know it, and a lot of people it might resonate with the audience listening to this is, if you look at my career, the negative aspect of it that I always get questioned is, why are you moving so often, and whether it's within a short time
right? Because
looking 2 years or 2.5 years,
your LinkedIn profile, it's pretty clear that
why does that happen? And I think for me, a lot of that motivation and why I've kind of taken that approach is
not just the companies that you've worked at or the brands that you've worked for, but also in terms of some of the sectors
to how I've lived and where I've grown up and moving everywhere and trying to adapt and be good at new things.
Tell us a little bit more about that. I'm really fascinated to hear about your story.
Myself and my career is to have that
across these many companies.
Mental flexibility and adaptability to your career, that it's never going to be a linear line, right? You join a company and you just work up that ladder and go off. My career has always been about challenging, exploring new things, leveraging skills in different contexts. And the biggest learning, I think, is wherever, if you strip the company apart and the people apart and the product apart, the core foundations in a lot of these businesses, a lot of the industries, especially in e-commerce and digital marketing and marketing to a broad extent, is quite similar. It's surprisingly similar. So there's, there are nuances that you pick up and you learn, but the core fundamentals remain pretty much anchored in the same thing. And that's quite exciting for me as well to see and learn.
And you spend quite a lot of time in the world of football, which obviously as a football fan and also as somebody that doesn't speak with people of that industry much, because I work in consumer goods and retail, I don't have much insider info about that world. How was it? I mean, tell us a bit about like the quirks of that world.
Yeah, it was a dream come true, right? I was really young. It was one of my first jobs.
Yeah, I imagine. At that type of age.
Yeah, it was my first job in Europe was to work in football. So as I mentioned, when I moved to Germany, it was on the agency side, doing a lot of consumer insights, media research work for football, so Champions League, Europe, for UEFA, for a lot of football clubs. And it was funny because, I grew up in Malaysia, went to university, lived in the UK, went back. So I was a big football fan. And in Malaysia, if you know, because of the time difference, Champions League football was always at 3:00 in the morning. So, and I would be up with my friends. We'd go off we wouldn't have, satellite TV was quite expensive. So you never had it at home. You'd have to go off to like one of these cafes in the middle of the night that would still be open 24 hours to watch football. And I remember this vivid, distinct memory that I had of just going off and watching these games at 3:00 in the morning, 4:00 in the morning. And then a year and a half later, I was actually in the stadium watching a game live, working. And it was just, for me in my head, it was just, I just couldn't, it took me a while to just comprehend the fact that going from a fan to being in the stadium, it's an amazing experience. I think the football industry it's so exciting, right? There's the one big parallel to brands that I take is, like, me being an e-commerce practitioner in digital marketing, one of the biggest challenges that brands have, and you guys will appreciate it, like your acquisition costs, right? People talk about acquisition costs, going out, getting eyeballs and driving traffic and momentum and building on their retention. That's one area that football doesn't have that big a challenge because they've got a catchment of just loyal, diehard fans who are set there, and the way to monetize them and to really, monetize in the football sense is negatively viewed by a lot of the fans because, clubs are getting richer. They think clubs are making too much money. But ultimately, the football industry is so unique in the sense that you've got a catchment of really strong, passionate fans. You've got really good base of, brands, agencies, people who spend a lot of money to kind of develop the game and develop, opportunities within that for consumers. And one thing that surprised me is on the digital side, on the content, they're well advanced and driving a lot of, innovative thinking around that, whether it's fan experience, engagement in sports. But on the commercial side, on the digital e-commerce commercial side, they're still lagging behind, which is surprising me compared to some of the brands. So I think that's one of the unique perspectives that I've seen. I didn't work in kind of the e-commerce digital marketing side when I was in football. It was a different area. But over the years of just knowing people in the industry, keeping an eye on it, keeping abreast of things that have been going on, I think there's still so much of untapped opportunity, commercial opportunity on the digital side.
Yeah, and you stopped working for UEFA in 2006, which is when we. No, sorry. I made a mistake because that was the first company. Anyhow,
yeah.
I'll let you ask the next question, Efrain.
Yeah, it was. I think the one advantage that I had with working in football that allowed me to make that transition relatively seamlessly, I would imagine, at least from my experience, was the fact that I was very much a data person, right? I did consumer insights, media research, and insights. So data was always the anchor of everything that was kind of the basis of my career up to that point. And when I was looking at opportunities to move away from sports, I'd been in the totality, like when I left FIFA was the last kind of football role that I had after UEFA.
Just out of
was in
curiosity,
2013, I believe. Yeah, 2013.
Given, like you said, that you spent
2012,
those
2013,
initial years
I was looking
in
at
the football
how,
industry,
what are the areas that I was interested in developing, and how could I
let's say, more traditional
upskill myself
type of consumer goods
make
companies.
myself more.
Can you walk us through a little bit of what that
guess,
transition was like
rounded
in terms of, like, you've already started to draw some of those comparisons, so you look back in terms of like where they were in terms of level of development around commercial capabilities. But I'm just curious to hear more
doing all
around
these,
how that
really
transition
fun
was
things as a
moving into
football
consumer
fan.
goods from
But
football.
I felt like I still needed to develop myself and get much more of a stronger business sense and acumen. Working in football, I had exposure to a lot of brands. So, the likes of Heineken and MasterCard and Ford were all big sponsors in Champions League and Europa League. And one of the things that really excited me was I was on the data side. I had a lot of insights. I had a lot of information around how, consumers were engaging with brands, how they can engaging with sports, what they were doing. And then I would always pass these bits of information and data onto the brands, who would then take it and apply it to either commercial tactics that they would have, and also apply it to other areas of their kind of above the line marketing or below the line marketing that they were doing outside of the sports sphere. And that got me thinking, like, I wanted to be on the other side, like, to not just be the person manipulating the data, looking at the data, analyzing it, and building on the recommendations. I wanted to sit on the other side to start executing on them and really making commercial decisions. And I, by chance, got a lucky break to join a sportswear brand called Odlo in Switzerland. So Odlo, if you don't know, they're one of the leading kind of base layer brands in Europe for skiing and kind of winter sports. And they were going through a transition at the time, moving away from a functional brand, athletic tech, kind of I guess, more functional tech-driven brand in terms of product technology, to being much more, very technical brand, to much more of a lifestyle-driven brand. And they approached me because of my data expertise and background. And they were like, hey, you've done a lot of insight research, consumer within the sports sphere. We need you to come and look at our setup within how we've set up with our consumers and retail and e-commerce and digital marketing, and really look at, they wanted someone who's not afraid of the data, let's put it this way, who could then review it, analyze it, and then start making kind of really educated decision-making on how to grow the brand on digital, on e-commerce. And that kind of kickstarted my transition into consumer goods, into e-commerce as well.
Yeah, because also I think that that type of sector is, for example, not as data-driven as FMCG is. So probably you brought part of that expertise, so you were able to bring that value as well. Along these lines, so you've changed sectors different times. Actually, you've been, I was just looking before, so you've been in outdoors like Odlo, you've been in Fossil, which is watches, you've been in Swiss knives. So once you've been in this consumer goods industry, has it been kind of a very transferable skills, or have you found that every industry you've had to learn a lot? Because I think I have my own type of thoughts around that. but some people are more, they only fish in their own category, for example, which I don't agree with. So
no, I think it's, I love the challenge of kind of changing and figuring out new industries. And I think, again, as I mentioned before, right, from a product lens, from a complexity, like internal complexity standpoint, like how you work with stakeholders and the processes internally, they're all very different, and they come with various different challenges depending on the sizes of all the brands, right? Like some of the brands that we talked about, like Odlo, I was in a global environment. Fossil, I was in a regional environment. Swiss Army Knives with Victorinox, I was back in a global environment. So that transition between global, regional, it has its nuances. From industry perspective, I mean, each industry has their challenges. Like the watch industry at the time when I joined was going through a massive transformation because of smartwatches. So, Apple Watches were starting to come out. Traditional retail was changing. It was moving in a different direction, away to kind of digitization, online, pure players coming into place. But you take that away and you replace watches with apparel, like the things that I'm doing now with Canada Goose. It's a similar kind of transformation and challenge, right? So traditional retail, the long tail of retail is facing a lot of challenges. The more wholesale.com, retail, pure play, they're growing. The ecosystem is changing. So those things are all very similar, regardless of the industry, whether it's watches, sportswear, apparel. And I think that skill level is transferable. I think the one thing that I would say, I worked with a Swiss startup brand in the kind of femtech space, to Ava, and that was a really interesting one, because that's the one area where I was quite, from a product lens, out of my comfort zone, because it was female related, about couples, women who wanted to conceive and have a baby. So it had all these different medical background and things that you really need to be clear about, and that presented certain challenges in terms of how you could market products, where it's a medical device and all these different things. So that was one where it was it's a different challenge again, but the fundamentals were pretty similar. You still had to go and acquire consumers, you still had to work with wholesale and retail and marketplaces. So all those things were pretty similar. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that I've learned in my, I've had to also have a very kind of honest discussion with myself to kind of review how, from a career lens, right? So this is more a personal reflection of mine. And, I'm not sure I could have been someone who stayed on in one company and just worked my way up and played that kind of role of going step by step into a different role, into a different project, and building my career within one company. And I think my mindset, and again, maybe it's an excuse that I tell myself, but that immigrant mentality and lifestyle is always about, moving, challenging yourself, going, taking the next step. The thing that motivates me and that MO is to kind of put myself in uncomfortable situations and, learning a new company process, going in
and I think it also
stuff.
speaks to what you mentioned at the beginning, right? Which is your ability to
it's been useful to
be flexible
one extent,
and to challenge yourself. So it seems very consistent with,
on the other hand, it also
with your
means
MO
that, you
throughout your career.
sometimes
Like you said, this one was particularly
questions, especially when you're,
because it was very
moving
different than
on
the
or
other
looking
ones.
into a new role.
Say, in
People
terms
are
of like
always
the
going
places you've been in your career.
What really motivates you? Are you going to stay in the company? Are you going to, and I think it's a mentality thing. Yeah.
It has a very easy explanation, Ganesh. Basically, you've been on the crest of the wave of the e-commerce revolution, and you've been in companies where you've practically always been the most senior person in e-commerce in that company. So
yes,
in these situations, you can only grow as much as this e-commerce channel is growing, right?
Yes.
And that has a lot of limitations from a size perspective, from a span of control perspective. So it's the most normal thing to have done that cycle and then move on into another company. So
yes, yeah,
I speak obviously with a lot of people that are in the same position as you.
yeah.
So that's basically the explanation to it. And also because you've been in companies that have been in that type of size.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's I've learned a lot of things as well, and has been quite fortunate to work with some amazing people and also mentors in most of these companies as well. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge for us for Canada Goose as a brand, because of just the complexity of really executing omni-channel to the highest level, right? And I would be lying to say if we are there, we're not. And I think the way we look at it from that perspective is like, how do you create that seamless experience that blends kind of the digital side of all our touch points to the physical side of our touch points. And luxury is very much still focused on the physical experience, and we have a lot of difficulty translating that physical experience onto the digital experience. So an example, right? If you take luxury, and not Canada Goose luxury per se, but just luxury in general.
So Ganesh, I'm curious to ask you, because I also
you
look
go
at
in,
some of the
you get a
companies you've
glass of
worked at,
champagne, your service,
specifically now with Canada Goose.
You have all these
your
really
experience in luxury,
premium and amazing experiences
to hear your
feel and
perspective
touch and look
on
at the product.
omni-channel,
But when you
and
go onto the website,
how you think about creating those
99%
seamless
of the time,
experiences, not just in
it maybe
digital,
has
but
some nice
across
visuals and videos,
all the other
but
different
you
channels
still
of
have
distribution as well.
I call it, again, with all due respect, the kind of the basic e-commerce benchmarks of how you set up an e-commerce site, where you have a big banner saying free shipping, 24-hour delivery, like all these basic things where you're like, you could be selling toilet paper, or you could be selling really amazing jewelry, but the fundamentals are all the same. So I think trying to translate that service is a challenge that I'm not sure I think very few brands have cracked or claim to have cracked it. And the way we are looking at it is, again, going back down, breaking it down to the data level. So looking at who are our customers at the moment in the stores. Are they tourists, which, to a certain extent, especially for a brand like Canada Goose, it was similar at Victorinox, which is also kind of a premium brand, very much heavy tourist driven in a lot of these big cities. So what will the tourist need versus what does a local in the community need when they come in and look at these experiences? How does our digital storytelling contrast to what happens in our store and the kind of really one-to-one service that we get with our brand ambassadors? So these are all the areas that we've been looking at to kind of understand better. How do we create these different things? And one of the big learnings that we have is that, there's a lot of complexity. So whether it's from a tech perspective to set up the kind of buy online, pick up in store, make appointments online, go into store. If you strip out those elements of, tech challenges, let's put it this way, the basis of it is still, how do you give the best experience, the brand experience online? And that's still quite a very basic question that all brands, whether you're luxury or not, you still ask the same thing, right? You have amazing product information, amazing, site speed. All those basic things still apply, whether it's luxury or non-luxury. So I think those are the things that we're trying to work on. The second part, which I think we need to spend a bit more time and which we are doing, is how do you translate the brand.com experience with our key accounts and with our main wholesale and retail partners. So whether it's the Selfridges of the world and the Harrods of the world. And that goes from, again, the experience that you find on the .com side to the experience when you land on their side. Is it similar? Is it, does the customer see a big difference? Do they get a better premium experience on Harrods than on our own website when they look at our products? And those are the things that we're working with our stakeholders to improve.
And are there any capabilities that you've developed at Canada Goose that you're especially proud of and you think are a differentiator? Because you're leaning on a very strong brand already, so.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that we have really a differentiator for us is we've got our internal CRM setup, which is called Basecamp. And Basecamp is where, a member community who we reach out to, who we talk to about latest launches and latest experiences, brand experiences, where you can win specific experiences with our brand in, whether it's in the Arctic or other places that we have with our brand ambassadors and that storytelling element. But, we don't look at it as isolation of, us against the retailers. It's about aligning us to our key accounts and who can offer this seamless experience, whether it's in a retail store in Regent Street, or is it with our partner at Selfridges, or is it with Harrods, or is it with Lafayette. So it's all these different kind of pockets that we are really building on. And again, we're still we're at an infancy level still as a brand, because we were, I think in 2017 is when we first became a retailer in that kind of D2C model versus being a wholesale partner. So we're quite, in the grand scheme of things compared to other brands, we are still, not there yet. Still, the upside is huge though for the brand.
Yeah, and there's been some confusion sometimes also on who manages direct to consumer, who manages the key accounts.
Yeah.
At the beginning, it was all under the same e-commerce umbrella. Then it was separated because obviously there's differences. And for example, you're mentioning them both together. So what type of organizations do you think make more sense?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Like all brands, and again, in my career trajectory from Odlo, it's been in different pots and different organizational setups. I think what makes sense is, at the end of the day, you follow the consumer, and a digital consumer is, regardless of whether they shop .com or they shop on a wholesale partner, they're the same type of consumer. And I think the old days of running and managing a digital key account, it's no longer a sell-in model of a business, right? You're not going in and selling in a collection. The collection is one part, but the actual growth of a digital account, whether it's marketplaces or with a retail wholesale partner that has a heavy online presence, it's about, again, looking at consumer acquisition, looking at digital campaigns. How do you drive a lot of that momentum? And in my experience, the e-commerce and digital marketing teams are in the best position because they're the ones who are constantly, they're the ones constantly working on platforms, looking at where the consumer is and how best to reach them. So having that in one team and working together, whether it's .com or whether it's through the marketplaces and key accounts, I think is the most I guess, seamless way to go and attack this opportunity with the consumer. And that's something that, we've been working on with most of the brands that I've been on. It may have started separately, but we've always worked towards bringing them under one umbrella, under one team. If it's all accounts or just the major accounts, that's obviously different depending on the size of the company.
So I'll just ask you one last question. No worries. Ganesh, this has been fascinating, and we could talk to you for hours to pick your brain around digital and e-com. But I know that we need to be conscious of your time, and we do have one final question for you, and it's a question that we ask all of our guests. If you could go back in time to the beginning of your career and give yourself at that point, that young Ganesh, one piece of advice based on everything you learned over your career, what would that piece of advice be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would advise my younger self to be even more open to change and embrace risk and continue to stay curious. And I think as I get older, my tolerance for risk is getting obviously a lot less bullish than it was before because of obvious reasons, right? You're conscious.
This was Sri Ganesh Santhiram, Senior Director for Digital Retail EMEA at Canada Goose. Ephraim, what are your key takeaways?
Well, it's great to always talk to somebody like Ganesh, who is a true world citizen. And I think it's really inspiring to hear about how he's very open to trying new things and being adaptable throughout his career. So I think there's a lot to be learned from his experiences in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that I thought was very interesting and hadn't come up on the pod yet was the fact that he referred to data as a fundamental transferable skill in his career that allowed him to transfer from the agency world of football side to consumer goods. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, well, I think you and I both as football fans were fascinated to hear about his time at UEFA. And it is interesting to hear about how that's where he established that data foundation that has really served him well throughout the rest of his career.
Yeah, and then talking about his career, I mean, and it's a bit what we talked about at the beginning. It's like he took those fundamentals in digital and e-commerce, and that they really are the same regardless of the category, right? And it's not so much about the product, but more about the functional knowledge.
Yeah, no doubt, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to also hear about how he transitioned from being in a data insights type role to really moving more into execution. Yeah. And again, how that data foundation has really served him well in a lot of companies. But I think the example he specifically referenced was starting with Odlo.
Yeah, absolutely. And then from an e-commerce perspective, he mentioned something that I thought was interesting, which is not necessarily the case a lot of times, which is having key accounts and direct-to-consumer under the same team. Like sometimes direct-to-consumer sits somewhere and key accounts report into sales. So I thought it was interesting that he, in his experience, he thinks that works better, to keep all the digital efforts together.
I agree. And I think, it has a lot to do when we talk to him about how do you do omni-channel and luxury and bringing physical and digital under one umbrella, if you will, or one connected journey. I could see how that may have also then influenced his thinking around, like you said, bringing D2C key accounts under one umbrella, if you will, or like running them as part of one joint group.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Ephraim, for your key takeaways, and thanks to our audience for listening to us. Remember, if you've listened to a few of our episodes and like what we do, to leave us a short review on your favorite player, be it Spotify or Apple, and have a great day. And we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys.